I just want to welcome everybody here to the Pioneers in Dairy Science webinar. This one will be given by Dr. Mike Hutjens from the University of Illinois, and he's going to discuss extension work and the future of extension work. So with that, I think we're ready to get going.
Well, very good, Eric, and thank you very much for that introduction. And I think we have a fun presentation for you today. First, my thanks to you and the Graduate Student Division of ADSA for the opportunity to present the webinar. It's a real honor to do this for you. And again, thanks to the FAST staff and Derek for being there to help coordinate and being the backup IT at this point as well. So today's topic is looking the future of the dairy industry. And I think it's fun because we're going to look back a little bit and look ahead. And for some of my grad students that are listening, this will be kind of somewhat new to them. And for some of the people who are online that got a little more age on them, they will understand some of this information as well. Well, certainly this is your handsome person looking at you right here. I'm Mike Hutjens, Professor of Animal Sciences Emeritus, as Eric mentioned earlier, at the University of Illinois here in Central Illinois. And the good news, it's raining in Illinois, and we are sitting on a bumper crop. So welcome to our webinar, our Pioneer webinar for the day. And maybe a little background I thought might be useful because it had an impact on my career and my opportunities. I grew up on a great Holstein dairy farm in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And for you Packer fans, that makes me a cheddarhead as far as that goes. And of course, did the 4-H, FFA, and Junior Holstein thing. And for my grad students, if you've got that on your pedigree, that's going to be extremely valuable for you, depending on where you end up in your career when you finish up at graduate work. I got all my degrees from the University of Wisconsin. We can argue about that a bit later if you wish. A master's degree in mastitis detection, a PhD degree in ruminant nutrition, and that was a joint one with human nutrition as well. I was a member of Alpha Gamma Rho fraternity, and that became a very valuable asset as well. I was a member of the University of Wisconsin dairy judging team, and I wasn't a very good judge. I just was kind of the third person on the team. That has been extremely helpful for me in my extension program. And then I spent 6 years in the Army Reserve. After finishing up my graduate work at Wisconsin, I spent 8 years at the University of Minnesota in an extension program, 100%. And due to some untimely deaths at Minnesota, I then picked up a teaching appointment which involved the judging team. Then after 79, I joined the University of Illinois here for 32 years. And you can see the time there, and now I'm in emeritus status as well. So what are we going to do in the next 35 minutes? And this goes pretty fast. We're going to look back a little bit to see how things have changed and some of the changes that are going to come in the future. At least my bias looks at this point. But then again, as graduate students, I want to challenge you. I think there's going to be some opportunities in the extension / dairy nutrition. You'll see why I put that / and or in there. My point is, if you're going to work in extension in Illinois, you're going to have a master's degree at the county level, depending on where you're employed. Otherwise, you wouldn't even be considered. I think if you are thinking of going forward, you got to get your PhD degree and do it now. Just do it now. I've got all these wonderful students that are going to leave for 2 years and come back, and they never come back. There's going to be some wonderful opportunities in the dairy nutrition area. And you could do that as an educator, which would be like working in extension or working at a land-grant college or working at a junior college or community college area. Feed consultant, we've got several big ones here in Wisconsin. All of them are PhDs. In one case, they're all PhD nutritionists. And then, of course, lots of neat opportunities in the feed and drug area, pharmaceutical areas. Those opportunities are going to be there as well. So certainly, I think the opportunity in the dairy nutrition area is really, really quite powerful. Well, I thought this is a fun way to start our webinar today, and that is change ahead. And things are really changing, and I guess you just have to react to those changes and make a decision how you're going to handle it. A lot of things change. For example, here's our dairy cow in the 1970s and 80s. In the 1990s, you can see we really got this cow smoking now. We did some dietary things changing. In the 2000, of course, you can see now we got her really fired up. She's really cooking for us here. And now in 2014, she's looking pretty green. We're going to come back and talk more about that in just a few minutes as well. So we got a three-parter, as we would say. We're going to look back 40 years because I thought this was kind of unique and interesting for some of you oldsters. And I think as young people, you might say, wow, that's kind of different. If you go back 40 years, early in my career, basically dairy farms are very diversified. Our dairy farm in Wisconsin had pigs. We also had mom's chickens. Registered cattle was kind of the new thing. We were all grade cattle, and so when I started 4-H, we bought some registered cattle. That was kind of the thing to do. Dairy farms are based on family labor. If you had lots of kids and grandpa and brothers and sisters on your dad or mother's side, then you had a larger farm. And many of the farms are generation-based. Our dairy farm, no longer in the family, was a third-generation farm, and nowadays in Illinois you'll find sixth and seventh generation farms as well. Back in the 40s, high-moisture corn was the new feed. In fact, there was some great research from the University of Wisconsin, Marshfield, saying ear corn was equal to shell corn. I really struggled with that concept, but we'll move on. Alfalfa was queen of the forage. Corn silage was considered steer feed. And in fact, that was a major thrust in the 40s, that you didn't feed corn silage to high-producing dairy cows. We had something called magnet feeders, which meant that this cow carried a magnet on her neck on a chain, and meant she had all the grain she wanted to eat. Kind of like going to a party and going to an open bar. We'll just leave that alone at this point. Of course, nowadays we have TMR, electronic grain feeders, and then back then something called cafeteria mineral feeders, which is just amazing. And we put 14 minerals out, and this cow was smart enough to know which day she needed copper, and which day she needed cobalt, and which day she needed salt. And that was a concept that was there for about 4 or 5 years. Didn't work, but then again, it was a great marketing ploy. You look at me, I changed a little bit over 40 years. You can see a handsome dude there back a few years ago, and for some of you probably wouldn't realize that, but even I looked a little differently as well. And so you can see 40 years can make changes as well, not only in the dairy industry, but in dairy specialists as we go on. This is a real success story, and I believe you can see my pointer coming up here. Jim Baltz put this together for me, a colleague of mine, and you can see the white line, that's the U.S. dairy industry. And take a look, somewhere around in the 1960s, it really took off, and almost a straight line relationship in milk production. What a success story. You'll notice in red is New Mexico. New Mexico is the #1 dairy state right now in the U.S., averaging, as you can see, almost 25,000 pounds of milk per cow. The national average sitting at around 22,000 pounds of milk. And here are the two states I work in, and you might argue that's the reason they're low, is because Hutjens worked in those two states. There sits, you can see Illinois in Minnesota, and you can see that they also are below the national average and way below Mexico. That's a real challenge, because high-producing cows end up making more money and give us some real flexibility. So in summary, let's look back to the 1970s. In summary, agriculture was a way of life. In other words, a great way to raise family, a great way to develop really good life skills, family skills, work ethics. We go from there. Dairying in the 1970s was very good. Lots of good money was made in those days. In fact, land values were going up. A company called Harvestor just was in their golden years. If you were a good dairy farmer, and most farmers in the Midwest, you had a harvester there, it was kind of like a tombstone saying it was just really a good dairy farm. Interesting extension was a key resource. When I was working in Minnesota in the 1970s, we were told to limit our meetings in Minnesota to 80 a year. And we have four excellent specialists there. So we had 300 dairy meetings in the state of Minnesota in the 1970s. Extension staff, dairy staff, were very important locally and also at the state level. In many cases, farmers would not make decisions, or boards would not meet, and we were expected to be at those board meetings to have input in making the decision. Back in the 70s, the DHIA was run by Dairy Extension, and people like Clarence Olson and Don Volker and Gary Harpstead, Lee Majeski, Mike Tomaszewski, these were just as real leaders in this program on DHIA. And of course, computers were just starting to come into being in the 1970s, so we weren't at that point. Well, Eric, that takes care of the first part of the program, kind of saying, well, what's happened back? But you can see a totally different type of extension program, and in terms of impact and priorities in terms of on land-grant colleges. We now move down to today, looking at 2014, or in the last couple of years, and things are really changing. This will be my quiz question. If anybody would recognize her, we cannot do that because our lines are closed. But this is a very famous cow, Evergreen View My 1326. And why is she so excited? Oh, by the way, she is a 2E, a very pretty cow as well. Well, this supposedly still is our record cow here in the U.S., 72,000 pounds of milk. You can see nearly 3,000 pounds of milk fat and over 2,000 pounds of true protein. This is a cow is up in Manitowoc, or in the northeast part of Wisconsin. But just remember that graph. We showed you a bit earlier the average cow producing 22,000 pounds of milk. Many people say, well, maybe this is a mature industry. Things aren't going to change. Just remember, we have cows now that are routinely reaching 70 and 60,000 pounds of milk. We have herd averages now that are approaching 40,000 pounds of milk. There's a herd in southern Wisconsin, 40,000. Our top herd in Illinois, 34,000 pounds of milk. So certainly these cows, genetically, management-wise, nutrition-wise, have some tremendous potential here in the future as we go down this road. I thought this was appropriate to put in, and that is that right now, back in the 70s and 80s, once that bulk truck left our farm, we didn't care much about it. That milk was gone. Well, that's no longer true. Our real target now in the dairy industry are consumers. And all these people are having certainly impact in terms of expectations on food quality, food safety, cost of handling food, certainly a big factor. And, of course, one of the big deals was to get McDonald's, to come in with many of their coffee drinks and their milk drinks and yogurts and that, because it really became a very valuable place to market, obviously, many of our dairy products. And, of course, Pizza Hut and some of our those people are critical as well. So let's take a look at today. Well, I think these are influencers. Everybody has these numbers in their mind. I know of 2 processors here that serve northern Illinois. All they want is a semi-load of milk every other day or every day, which means 300 cows will get you a semi-load every other day. 600 cows will get you a semi-load every day. And our largest farm in Illinois markets about 5 to 6 semi-loads a day. Several months ago, he indicated to me that those 5 semis went to 5 different milk plants in the Midwest. And so they didn't have to go back and commingle the milk. That milk had wheels on. It left the farm, met all the safety requirements on drug residue, quality components, and was there 24 hours in the bottling plant or in the cheese plant or the yogurt plant to be made product. The number I use is 1.2 million pounds of milk per full-time equivalent. What's full-time equivalent? Well, that's dad. Oh, if some of you grad students are coming back to the farm, you have a full-time equivalent. If mom is employed in the farm, that's 3. You got a herdsman, yeah, that's 4. You may have some other help as well. Suddenly, you'll see many of these dairy farms have 4 or 5 people that are going to be needing salaries coming off that farm. And suddenly that 1.2 million pounds of milk, that's probably about 55 or 60 cows. So many of our modern farms are going to be milking close to that semi-load every other day just because they have that much personnel on the farm. And you know what? A lot of our young people that are in colleges no longer are like my dad. He only left the farm twice. Once was his honeymoon, and once when he broke his leg. That's the only 2 times he left the farm in 45 years. We have some alternate labor sources coming into play here. Certainly Spanish becomes a very, very popular language as we look at people coming from Central and South America. We also have labor coming from Eastern Europe coming into play as well. I think we're seeing an emphasis on longevity. We know that the first year and a half or 2 years cows are milking, they have to pay all their bills for being raised as a heifer. So certainly longevity is coming into play. A lot of interest in crossbreeding, genomics, and inbreeding. Certainly we're looking at that side of the equation. Robotic milkers are here, coming from Europe, very, very popular in Canada, and quickly coming into Illinois here. And we're talking robotic milkers, not just for 150 cow dairy. We know of a farm that has 10 of them. And so as a result, you can see some applications there. And then processing milk on the farm. More about that in just a few minutes. Look at these charts very quickly. These are more recent ones we got. Get an idea where the dairy industry is. Look at milk production ranking. And this is total pounds now. We'll look at cow production in just a minute. You can see California, Wisconsin are 1 and 2, but you can see where most of the milk in the United States is coming from in those states in terms of as far as 1 billion pounds of milk. We look at what's the per capita consumption. Just use a figure I think Hoard's Dairyman publishes each year, about 600 pounds of milk equivalents for cheese and butter and yogurt, ice cream and fluid milk. And so you can see a very important trend. You can see southeastern part of the United States, including Illinois, is big-time milk deficit. So milk's going to move that, and then you can see states like Wisconsin. Look at Idaho, almost 8,500 pounds of milk per person. Obviously, that milk's got to go someplace unless they take milk baths or something like that, but obviously we have to find homes for that milk. Now you can see why there's a lot of interest in milk going into that panhandle of Texas and coming down into Indiana and places like that, much closer to getting that milk here to consumers. Milk production per cow. Isn't this humbling? Now look at the blue. The blue states are the top 10. And here in the Midwest, only Michigan makes the top 10. Look where all the high production is. And that's got to change. That's got to change if we are going to compete here in the Midwest. And, of course, some of you are going to say, well, Hutjens, you're 26. And the answer is, yeah, I see that as well. I see that. And we're not making that ground up. So that's a real challenge you'll see here in just a minute. I thought this was kind of an interesting slide. A little tough to see because I couldn't get my tech guy isn't here, but you can see what's changed in the last 5 years. Now, this is not Democrats or Republicans. This looks at cow numbers. So if you've got a blue dot, that doesn't mean there's a bunch of Democrats there. It simply means that there's been an increase of 250 milk cows. And look at, can you see the I-29 corridor? Look at all the blue there. Here's that Texas panhandle over here. Here you can see California, the shifting of California. This at one time was a huge milk area. Well, the population has pushed those folks up. Here sits Washington. Here sits that big Idaho area we talk about. So you can see some real changing that's going on in terms of where these cows and milk cows are changing. This is interesting. Every dot represents in 2012 2,000 cows. So again, if you're going to work in the pharmaceutical, the consulting area, if you want to be a dairy educator, well, you may want to not be looking at Montana and Wyoming right away. You may want to be looking at these crooks in Wisconsin and Minnesota. You can see here New York, Pennsylvania, California. Certainly these areas here in that in the Texas Panhandle, as they call it over here. Certainly areas where there's lots of growth going on as well. Farms, number of farms of 200 cows, and I would argue, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but I think these are your futuristic farms. I don't say we're going to see many cows milking many farms milking less than 50 cows unless it's a religious-related type topic. But anyway, you can see again the big farms again pretty much mirrors the previous one of where these big farms are going to be. Bigger farms are going to want services, and of course are going to have infrastructure that will support those companies and those individuals as well. I like this slide. Look at it. You have to think about this, and you may want to come back. I know Eric is recording this as fast as, and it'll be available on the website. But this company simply says what percent of the income is coming from dairy production. So if you're a red state, and here you can look, take a look at Wisconsin, New York, look at Vermont, look at Maine even, areas of Maine. It simply says dairying is big business. So why do you think in some of these new farm bills you see strong support coming from Leahy, Senator Leahy, for example, Senator Cole in Wisconsin, big promoters of the dairy industry because they know, as we jokingly say, which side of the bread is buttered on. Now look at Illinois. Here's an interesting situation. There are more cows, dairy cows in Illinois than there are in Vermont. And look at, we're pretty white. And of course, that's because we're sitting on this bowser of a corn and soybean industry here in the state of Illinois. And of course, this year, that's even going to be bigger. So you can see in Vermont, I spoke at their dairy days a couple times. Vermont, the governor shows up, the Secretary of Ag shows up, their government people are there. I'm not even sure our governor knows how to milk a cow or how to spell dairy, much less show up at some of these activities. So this becomes politically very important, determining in terms of financing future programs. And of course, Wisconsin has got a number of really neat dairy programs I just wish we had here in Illinois. We look at cash receipts. I thought this was interesting. The source you can see listed down there on the bottom, cash receipts, and you can see dairy goes through all these cyclic periods. So you can see 2009 was a killer of a time. 2013 is going to be one of our very best years in terms of receipts. 2014 appears it might even be stronger depending on where that milk price goes in the world here in the next 2 or 3 months as far as that goes. We look, this comes from a colleague in Wisconsin looking at spread, and this is 2013 information. This is cost of production, COP, cost of production, and you can see the average cost production that he had was around $20 per hundredweight. The average milk price was $22, so you can see a really nice spread. These are very good, a very good database. You can see again that the lower half or the lower end of that was, you can see, much lower, but look what the good herds are doing, making $3.50 per hundredweight profit. And think about some of these farms now that have 2,000 or 3,000 cows, averaging 30,000 pounds of milk, and this becomes a very large figure as far as that goes. I thought I'd add this as well because that's another question. What about these organic farms? And in his analysis, and he writes for Hutjens Dairyman. You'll know who Gary is, but anyway, you can see their milk production quite a bit lower as compared to some of the other ones. But you can see their cost of production organic quite a bit higher versus grazing quite a bit lower. Now you can see what their milk in their gross price was, and there you can see that spread between organic and conventional milk, and then you can see their net profit. So there's a couple different ways of making money, and certainly organic is one. And the last figures I saw, about 4.5% of the milk in the U.S. is organic based. And so that's an interesting number as well. And grazing, you can see in some parts of the country, much more popular than it is here, for example, here in Illinois. This looks at different parts of the country, and again, you can come back and look at these. There's lots of interesting things. We're going pretty quickly through this information today, but you can see in the last couple of years, in 2013, you can see this is the all milk price. You might call this income over feed cost. You can see here is the national average, and you can look at this little yellow one here. That's those crooks in Wisconsin. Here are those orange ones, Fighting Illini Orange or Syracuse Orange. Well, they're doing pretty well also. So you can see that these two states, relative to the national average, are really good ways and places to enjoy good income over feed costs. And in some cases, that is because they enjoy stronger milk prices, as in New York and Wisconsin, an abundance of economical feed and forage resources as well. So again, that's kind of the situation in 2013 and 2014. Then, of course, what about consumers? And so I went to our local grocery store here a couple of weeks ago, and you have all kinds of products out there. And here we go. And you can just take a look at this. And in fact, Gene McCoy, my colleague, is sitting here this weekend. You can now buy milk for $1.98 a gallon here at one of our grocery stores as one of the leaders for Friday and Saturday. So certainly we'll look at the differential in price here. Again, we've got some other beverages out there, and they will fall right in line with these prices over here. Some of our soy beverages, our almond beverages, they're up there as well. And so you can see lots of choices out there, and we do sell, and they do sell these products, no question about it. Well, I also thought I'd throw this in and divert just a little bit because I think it's a topic that you grad students are going to face in the future, and that is what about this carbon footprint, this greenhouse gas, the temperature. And notice this little cartoon appeared in the Wisconsin State Journal. So obviously it has a big input, and of course here is my driver saying, "Hey, stop destroying our planet, driving his great big bad vehicle," and here's his cow belching methane gas up. Most of you know these numbers, but you can see when you look at greenhouse gases in the next couple of PowerPoints, the GHG stands for greenhouse gases. You can see methane is a real big-time player in this, as is nitrogen oxide. And why is that important? Because cows produce methane, and they will belch up about 6 or 7% of their energy as methane. That's bad news for the cow, and bad news for dairy farmers, and bad news for consumers, because that's an energy loss. So we're going to try to work on that. More about that in just a few minutes. I thought I'd put this slide up. It shows in terms of looking at animal operation emissions coming from an NRC publication, and these are the various categories of emissions you can have. I thought that was, first of all, interesting to know that it's more than just greenhouse gases. Now, this is the impact it has in terms on the environment, and you can see they are listed from the most important, ammonia, to the least important, odor. But if your next-door neighbor, if you gave he or she the choice to put these together, notice the big one down here, of course, is odor. It has no impact on the environment. It may have a quality of life, but it has no health hazards. This is basically the concern would be, and here you can see haze, climate change, quality of life. That means you're living next to a pig farm, dairy farm, beef farm, or a sewage treatment plant, and then, of course, here sits health and haze concerns as well. So I think that's important to know what, in terms of health aspects. And we get all these big arguments in the Midwest of citing dairy farms, livestock farms, hog farms, of terms of what are the concerns. And many of them come down right down here to odor and value of land, have nothing to do with these big factors sitting up here as well. Now, I don't want to. I don't want to minimize this. This is a PowerPoint that says if you look at milk's carbon footprint, where does it come from? Take a look at orange. That's Fighting Illini orange for you non-Illinois folks. Sorry about you folks in Ohio State. That was bad news today, I heard. Anyway, you can see feed production is 20% the carbon footprint. Milk production is 52%. So dairy farmers, you have about 70% of the carbon footprint that you impact, you control, you can change. Another 17% is transportation processing. Another 6% is at the retail. And then 5% is getting it home and getting rid of it in terms of disposing of a milk product if you do not consume it or if it goes out of date. So certainly a big factor, no question. Let's not minimize that. That's going to be important here in the future. Why is that important? Well, because your Secretary of Agriculture signed a document in Denmark several years ago that indicated that the dairy industry will reduce their carbon footprint by 25%, and I believe that's by year 2020. People said, oh, by the way, he signed that before he did any checking back here with milk processors, dairy organizations, or anything like that. The good news is that's not going to be a problem. We're making tremendous progress, and of course, the National Dairy Group is really taking that on as a challenge. Isn't this interesting? I'm not sure they're doing this yet, but the European Union a couple years ago indicated they were going to put a carbon footprint label on all products in the grocery store, and included pork and beef and milk and soybeans and beans and vegetables, all that kind of thing. And then New Zealand actually has placed a tax on animals to try to conduct research to try to reduce greenhouse gases. And if you go to the National Dairy Science meetings every year, there's always at least a dozen papers that really look at research trying to address how to reduce greenhouse gases on that. This is a slide from South Dakota. You can see the reference there. You can see that agriculture makes up about a third or about 30% of the greenhouse gases. So we do have a dog in that hunt. And so here you can see a cow at the University of Illinois. She's studying fecal droppings to determine factors here to reduce greenhouse gases. And we'll just go through two quick PowerPoints quickly. First of all, this comes from Cornell, a nice study put together by Dale Ballman's group out there. And it looks like right now that animal agriculture makes up about 3% since 1990. So there's been a big argument on that. Notice the difference. Milk production up 20%, but here's an important take-home message. And there's probably two or three of them, and this is one of them. When you talk about greenhouse gas, look at it per pound of milk. Don't go on per cow basis, because these cows eat much more feed, and as a result of higher dry matter intakes, they produce more methane. So don't get in that dogfight and that argument. You'll lose every time. But if you look at it per pound of milk, or per pound of cheese, per gallon, however you want to do that, you can see about a 60% reduction in the last 60 years, or maybe even 70 years, depending on how you want to calculate that. Tremendous success story there at this point. And then you hear about, well, we just have to get rid of some of this technology. Isn't this interesting? If you want to produce the same amount of milk compared to green milk, and that's the second take-home point, I'm calling milk green, meaning milk produced using all the technologies approved by our government, by FDA, and can be effectively used on dairy farms. I call that green milk. I don't call that conventional milk. I don't call that traditional milk. I call it green milk. And just ask somebody, do you buy green milk in the store? And they're going to ask, let's see, I buy chocolate milk or strawberry milk. What in the world is green milk? The window's open. If you have green milk, then it will take, if you do not do green milk, it will take 8% more cows to produce that same milk. And one of the reasons it's called green is because you can use RBST. I'm arguing in the future we will see more RBST being used in the United States. That's another lecture that you're going to hear about in a couple of in the future here. Now, you say, well, what about this organic milk? Boy, I like organic milk. Do you realize it would take 30% more cows and resources and land and fertilizers or whatever you want to look at to produce that same milk? And that's, again, from that Cornell study as well. So can we reduce the carbon footprint? Sure we can. And if this was a nutrition lecture, then we could spend 10 minutes going through all these factors here. But if you want to reduce your carbon footprint in Illinois or New York or Wisconsin or California, increase milk yield, continue to use RBST. We already talked about that. Use Rumensin. That is an antibiotic that selectively changes the rumen microbes to be more efficient. There's a 7% reduction in methane production by using that product there, and then getting a good rumen fermentation, key use of feed additives, and then, of course, producing high-quality forages. All these things reduce carbon footprint, and most farmers would say, well, Mike, that just is pretty makes common sense. And the answer is yes, it does. Now, let me play hardball, because if I ever get elected president, I'm going to do this. President Hutjens, that has an interesting ring to it. But I'm going to come in and say, okay, I'm going to make sure we're going to get rid of the greenhouse gases so we don't keep having all these concerns about global warming and ice cap and stuff like that. So I'm going to legislate only high-producing cows are going to be allowed in the United States. So if your cows are 1/3 below the average, then you got to sell them. All cows have to milk 3 times a day. We'll consider making smaller cows, either by using smaller genetic Holstein bulls. You could do this crossbreeding. You could do this with brown cows. We move on. All cows must be injected with RBST. You know the reason why. All cows and heifers will be fed ionophores. That's for obvious reasons. All heifers will calve in at 23 months of age. Only milk below 400,000 somatic cell count will be allowed to go into the milk market. All cows will have to be bred artificially to superior bulls, and all cows have to be enrolled in a milk recording program. Wow. Do you realize what that would do to our carbon footprint, our greenhouse gas numbers? It'd be just amazing, and that's why we're seeing this 2020 guideline is going to be pretty easily to be met as far as that goes. Well, let's wrap this up. We're getting a little long-winded here, Mike. Summary, basically, you saw that in that bar graph. Lots of volatility in feed price and milk prices. Wow, the feed prices, do you realize we're talking $3.60 bushel corn potentially here in the U.S. In December, and Illinois, it costs $4.20 a bushel to produce it. That's going to have some interesting impact. We pretty much discussed this greenhouse gas things. Make sure you understand that very well. Here's the exciting part. When we look at technology as it relates to environment, in some cases they're 180 degrees apart. For example, RBST. If Walmarts of the world says we want milk with no RBST in it, but then they said we want to have a small carbon footprint, I'm sorry, those are diametrically opposed. And so you can't have it both ways. And I think you're going to see that's why I'm a little more bullish on looking at RBST potential in the future. Certainly a lot of interest in safe, local, inexpensive food sources. That's what our consumers want at this point. And I guess another take-home message I would add here at one of my colleagues' suggestion, and that the land-grant mission is no longer active on many agricultural campuses anymore. The land-grant mission includes teaching, research, and outreach or extension, and it's gone. It's not there. And I can look at such states as Illinois and Texas, and there are other ones as well, in which really that land-grant mission is no longer there. Our administrators give lip service to it, but when it comes time to support programs, they're not at the table. We move on. Well, let's finish up here, Eric, and look ahead 10 years. What might we be looking at? What might be in the future here? Well, here you can see is a nice picture of the White House, and I think in the future it'll be the greenhouse. So we're going to call that the greenhouse. I'm not sure who's going to be in it. We move on. I found this slide. I've used it now for almost 15 years, to be honest with you. It came from Cornell University. And back in the 1990s, they said, you know, the dairy industry is going to change. And you know what? They were pretty close. Right now, we're sitting at right around 48,000 dairy farms, but you can look at the trend line. And they're suggesting by 2020 that we're going to be down to about 15,000 dairy farms. I don't think that's going to be true because of the big role of being in the world market. But certainly, we're going to see fewer dairy farms, and look at the size of them. You look at here, they're suggesting 85% of the milk is going to come from cows and farms with 500 cows or more, and that's almost here today. And look at these smaller farms. Cows under 100 cows, you can see they're going to produce less than 3% of the milk. Look back here in the year 2000. They are producing nearly 25%, over 25% of the milk. So what a dynamic industry that you and I are working with, and hopefully you grad students will be a part of in the future. Again, in that same article, you can see where we're looking in terms of milk production. Here is milk production. You can see targeting 230 billion pounds of milk. And that could even be higher depending on where the international program goes. And then you can again see the number of cows going down here. They're projecting, down below 9 million cows. We're not there. But they're suggesting it's going to go down there. And of course, this whole international feeding the world thing becomes an important factor. So let's look ahead. Well, dairy extension has changed, no question about it. And in some cases, it's gone away. It's gone away. But I would argue the educational role that Dairy Extension has promoted in the last 30, 40 years will be there. Somebody else is going to assume that. And what do you mean by someone else? Well, some of you remember Monsanto back when they were marketing RBST and the tremendous skilled technicians and specialists that they had there. Zoetis. Some of you know Zoetis quite well. Some of you know Zimpro. Some of you will know Diamond V Mills. Wow. They just got some of the best educators in the world literally on their staffs right now. I think we're going to see more vertical integration. In other words, farmers are going to say, I'm not going to send it to a private milk plant. I'm not even going to send it to any of my co-ops. I'm going to control that. So I'm going to take it from the farm and put it on the consumer's plate, which means that they're going to produce milk on farm. They're going to control that processing there so they have more opportunity to get more of that consumer dollar and go from there. World markets are going to be a key. Do you realize right now 16% of our milk in 2014 leaves the United States? That's going to change because the world milk market now is much lower on powdered milk, on butter and cheese, yet it stays very strong in the U.S. A little bit of storm clouds on the future here. Consumer imagery and impact is going to be important. And I'm just totally confused because we've got this big issue in Illinois on raw milk. And Eric, you may know more about that than I do. But, you know, we're asking, how can you buy raw milk? It's kind of like saying, how can I buy water from Mexico and sell to the consumers in the United States? I draw that parallel to it. But here we're all excited about food safety, and then we're going to allow people to drink raw milk in cities that have never been exposed to those bacteria, those opportunistic situations. People look at me and say, Mike, but you grew up on a farm, you drank raw milk. The answer is yes, I did. But not many people grow up on dairy farms anymore and have that exposure as far as that goes. And then this is my favorite topic here. I think we're going to just get off the human plate. In other words, you and I can eat our cornflakes in our morning and we can eat our soybeans directly, but you and I have a tough time eating distillers grains and corn silage and grass and forages and byproduct feeds. And so we're going to start feeding more and more of our ruminant cattle, both beef and dairy, off of these non-human type products. Now that won't be a big issue this year because corn prices are down at $3 and $4 a bushel, but it will come back. Trust me, it will come back in the future. We'll start looking at $6 and $7 corn in the future as well. So certainly in summary, you can look, we've pretty much covered all of these pretty well. I'd like to certainly reinforce that we must continue to have research and education ways of getting that information out to our people. And then down here, I think you're going to see some pretty unique food items. In other words, we're going to look at omega fatty acids found in animal products, different protein fractions, some of our whey protein fractions specifically here, some of our key minerals. We already know about calcium and potassium there. They're going to be very important. And some of this is going to be done by genetic engineering. And now we got that problem, don't we? Genetically engineered cattle. Can we consume milk? Today we cannot. Today we cannot drink milk or eat meat from a genetically engineered animal. And wow, we can't have it both ways. If we have a cow that's somehow immunized to produce milk that may delay Alzheimer's, wow, wouldn't that be a tremendous scientific breakthrough? But then the government says, oh, but you can't drink the milk. We move on. So what's my bottom line as you wrap up here, and we're pretty well done? I've got to be involved. And here is my hit list. All of you that are on this conference call, on this webinar, or this presentation, this should be on your plate. You should be able to be aware, and I think this is huge. The humanizing of animal care. Do you realize you can now buy health insurance for your pet, dental insurance for your pet, a plot for burial? So suddenly many of our animals are becoming very humanized. We covered about the raw milk, the political aspects with our map we saw a bit earlier, animal welfare and rights. Every day we see those things coming into play. Environment will always be important. We just saw in Idaho a huge fish kill. Thousands of fish killed there. Came on the news yesterday, and it's being blamed on a dairy farm. Education will continue to be critical, but look at these areas. So develop your skill sets in some of these areas because you will have a marketplace to sell yourself. And, of course, consumer education and a voice. We're going to have to be more and more, and we're seeing more and more of our farmers now becoming willing to open up farms to tours, to be on Facebook and being on Twitter and places like that. So let's wrap this up, Eric. My 40 minutes, according to my watch, we are about 4 minutes late here. It's been a tremendous 40-plus years in the dairy industry. I had some great dairy staffs to work with here at Illinois, at Minnesota, and then at Wisconsin, where I got my training. So extremely powerful people. You young folks that are going to work in the dairy industry, you're going to find it's a great dairy industry. And you're not going to just stay here in Illinois or New York. You're going to end up going to China. You're going to end up going to South America, because these are going to be tremendous growth dairy areas, and you're going to work around the world, not specifically in your county or in your state or in the United States, and you too will have a great run as well. So with that, hopefully we've shared a little bit of information. You might have been a little bit more challenged, a little bit smarter. You can see my Jersey cow. She graduated. I was at her graduation program here at the University of Illinois. That's our animal science department building in the background here. And Eric, I'll turn it back to you. And if there are any questions, we'll try to answer them as best we can. But if not, it's been a great webinar. Thanks for the time. And Eric, it's back to you.
All right. Thank you. That was very interesting. We have a comment from Juan Tacarico. Just to clarify, U.S. dairy industry voluntarily established the 25% carbon reduction goal in 2008 via the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy, and the Secretary of Ag signed a memorandum of understanding shortly after that. And then also a question.
Okay.
What's your
That's
advice?
good clarification. Thanks, Juan. Appreciate that.
Another question from Juan too. Also, what is your advice to young professionals starting their career with an extension appointment at a land-grant university?
Well, I think and we have a number of them here at Illinois, Juan. I think that the key is that they kind of have to get a feel of where they want to go. Are they really in love with teaching? Are they really wanting to get into the research area, understanding what those challenges are going to be for funding as far as that goes, or are they going to want to come back into the industry? And I think there's different paths. In other words, if you're going to become a researcher, and if that's your goal, then you better develop some really good lab techniques so you can compete with funding in areas such as genomics right now, carbon footprint, waste handling. I mean, that's where the money's going to be. And most of our professors, I'm guessing, some may want to chime in there, they have to generate probably $100,000 or $200,000 a year in research dollars to run their labs and pay their grad students and to run their program. So I think it says you're going to become extremely well-trained scientists if you're going that direction. If you're going to become a consultant in the field, you better be able to look at dairy cows and judge them. It's kind of neat when you can walk on the farm and tell the farmer about, boy, there's a beautiful cow, and he or she will feel very good and says, you know, this kid has, or this individual has understand dairy cattle. So if you're going to go into that part of the program, you better get some experience. If you didn't grow up on a dairy farm, you better work at the dairy farm at your university farm, for example, or go out with the extension team, or get involved in the Dairy Challenge program, or get involved in dairy judging so you develop those skill sets as well. If you've got a farm background, wow, you talk about a blue chip. You know, when you go to Reno and put your chip down the table, the blue chip may be pretty valuable. Well, let me tell you, that's going to be pretty valuable as well. So, Juan, I think when you start your undergraduate program or graduate program, give a little idea of where you think you may want to go, but never shut a door. Never shut a door. I want to be honest with you, I never saw research as very exciting. I saw it a means to an end. And I knew I had to write a thesis and publish 3 or 4 papers, and from there I ended up going into extension. Just be careful on extension. I think there will be opportunities in some of those blue states we talked about, but I'm not sure. If you look at Illinois and Wyoming and some of those states there, I'm not quite sure if you're going to have many opportunities even at the county or regional or at the state level. So just be well aware things are happening here. That's probably more of an answer. That may be a longer answer than what you needed, one.
I'm not seeing another question, but I do have a question also.
Okay.
So I also at a land-grant university, and, you know, I think we try to be extension-oriented. But it's difficult. As you mentioned with raw milk, I've come up with some money, or some proposals to get some money to try and combat some of the garbage that's on the internet about raw milk. I mean, there's a lot of information there, but it's not good information. So, and it wasn't very well received. So, what I'm interested in is how can we you know, we're trying to feed the world. We have this genetic potential for our cows that is quite a bit greater than where we're at right now. Yet the public who drives our management practices, because they say we don't want RBST, we don't want GMO-fed cows, we're trying to make everything organic. You know, I mean, they're trying to go back to the 1940s, and yet we need to produce more milk and more food. How can we, and they want it from small family farms, which whatever, I'm not sure what that means exactly in their mind, but it's kind of a nostalgic idea, I think. So we need to reduce greenhouse gas, produce more food, use no technology, and do it on small family farms locally. How do we talk to the public about this in a way that's effective? Because something like, you know, you mentioned Facebook, social media, that's pretty much a black hole for information. And since I'm from university, I'm obviously lying, I think, to most of those people if I try and say anything to the contrary of the things I see posted there. So what do you recommend, or how do you think in the future we can go about trying to connect reality to the public opinion, or scientific reality to the public opinion?
Yeah, Eric, great comments. I think you've done a wonderful job, and all I'm simply going to say is, Eric, you got to get in that black hole. I think I'm going to go through Midwest Dairy Association and become Twitter friendly. In other words, if you're not in the black hole, in the trenches, and you're right, who is Eric and who is Mike? The answer is, well, we're just as reputable as some of those other people who are posting those things as well. So I think we're just going to have to get down in there and fight the battle. And I understand science, and we're all trained. You're trained as scientists, I'm trained as scientists. Consumers don't care about science, they care about perception. And so if they perceive organic raw milk has got more enzymes in it that's going to make their kids healthier, then we have to argue what are the downside risks to that. What are some of the concerns you should be raised with that, you know, and go from there. And so I think we just have to take it on, and that's where our dairy industry is. Farmers are coming around saying we've got to be very vigilant, and we've got to let people come in and see our cows. I mean, we had the Chicago Tribune online here 2 years ago, and this reporter wanted to comment about factory farms, and I go, well, what's a factory farm? Is there smoke coming from it? And, of course, then he defined his factory farms. After 15 minutes, he said, well, obviously, I've got all the information I need, and nothing ever appeared in the Chicago Tribune because I didn't give him the answers he wanted, you know, because his perception was cow misbehavior. And it says, you know, we got this big farm in Illinois that cows are milked 3 times a day. They're on the beach in sand. Feed's brought to them 6 times a day. The manure's flushed away 4 times a day. You know, they got it pretty cushy. They got rubber mats to walk on. That's better than walking on a sidewalk, you know. And we just went on from there, and he saw no story there at all. So I think, Eric, I think your comments are just priceless. I think you as a graduate student, as a dairy farmer, whoever might be listening to this thing, you just gotta stake your claim. And you're right, you won't win those arguments. You may not get funding for that, but the point is, you'll go to bed at 10 o'clock feeling better what's going on. I'm not sure I answered your question at all, but I think you and I and some of the rest of these people on the line just have to go down in that black hole where the tweeting and the emails and answering. My wife gets upset. About once or twice a year, we get this wonderful letters to the editor, really hammering animal agriculture. Or better yet, the gal who came from an eastern country and snuck in, and she published this. She snuck in some fruit in the United States. And they published that, and they did pick up on it. They did use my letter, and I said, do you realize what could have been in that vegetable that you snuck in for your kids so they could taste for the Thailand different thing, you know? But, you know, just have to be very vigilant and just to refute or comment or add science to it.
Yeah, and I agree. It's difficult because if you know, specifically on raw milk, if you go to the CDC website, they've got video testimonial from people who fed raw milk to their infants as is recommended by raw milk advocates because of those enzymes, and or their children, and these children end up with infections, kidney failure, you know, from E. coli infection,
Yep.
and it's awful. And information's there, but I guess they're looking at different information. So I guess we keep trying to fight the good fight. Oh.
Yeah, and of course some of those quotes are coming from medical doctors and that. So I mean they've got some stripes on their sleeves as well, you know. And but you know they got a book to sell, or they got a concept they want to go with, or they want to go on a talk show, you know. And so they're out there as well. But you know, for us here in the Midwest, the MDA Midwest Dairy Association, they've got all these consumer sheets to talk about raw milk, antibiotic, animal care, animal housing, antibiotic resistance, and they're written at a very nice level. And then the power is 25 or 30 references. So someone like yourself, who is a scientist, or somebody online here wants to really see the science, they can go back to those published journals and find and dig out the information if they wish. So I think those organizations and DMI, those organizations just do a wonderful job of having information at a level that can be understood by consumers and high school students and stuff like that. By the way, I do want to make a comment. I think Iowa State and Wisconsin are still part of the land-grant mission, so I don't want to cast a net saying that everybody is checked off on this, but certainly I think, and the reason I pick on those two states is that we work very closely with those two states, and they are maintaining some excellent field staff and some expertise at the county level and even at the state level, although Iowa State has lost some of their state specialists as well, but they still have more than half a person, for example, which is common in a lot of states now.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I think we'll cut her off there. Thank you again, Dr. Hutjens, for your time and interesting talk. And I don't think we have the information posted, but next month we're going to have Dale Bauman speaking on RBST. I don't have more information for the registration yet, but keep an eye on your email to sign up to attend that webinar. And with that, thanks everybody for your attendance and attention, and hopefully we'll see you next month.